our lesson tonight will focus on advanced logic games. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. If you're scouting around for other free options for LSAT prep, we do have a couple more available. We offer classes that are 10 sessions long. Those are available in most major cities and also online. And you can try the first session of any of those classes for free. So it's 3 hours of free LSAT instruction. And we also have a tool called LSAT Interact, which is a really cool adaptive video series. It's comprehensive of our LSAT curriculum, and it's taught by our instructors. And what's special about it is that it's not just recordings, but it has places where you'll stop and you'll solve a problem and you'll choose your answer on the screen, and the feedback that you receive will change depending on whether you get that problem right or wrong, or in what way you get the problem wrong. Hi, Stephen. I see we have a couple more folks joining us. We're just getting rolling with the session. If you're just joining us, I'd love to hear about you. You probably see the little orange light blinking. That's your chat option. That's your main tool for participation this evening, along with also the opportunity to answer some polls that will pop up throughout. In the chat, if you're just joining us, please let me know your name, where you're joining us from, and where you are at in your LSAT journey. So some people come to these sessions and they're just starting out with LSAT studying. Some people come to these sessions as they're kind of winding down and in review mode, or somewhere in between. Would love to hear a little bit about you. I'm going to keep chatting about today's session, but I'll keep an eye on that chat window as folks get a chance to tell me about themselves. So tonight's session is going to focus on logic games. The learning tool that we're going to use is one particular challenging logic game from practice test 68. We will use that as an opportunity to explore advanced logic game diagramming techniques, talk about how sometimes with challenging scenarios, there might be more than one strong way to set up a board. And then we're going to use a tool that everyone should be using at some point in their practice, which is timed question sets, where you practice the challenging time management element of logic games by doing sort of mini sets of questions and reflecting on how you made decisions and how you pushed yourself to stay on pace during those question sets. Hi, Samantha. Welcome. Cool. So we got a New Yorker, a Texan, and people at various stages in the process. I think that there will be something for everyone to get out of our session tonight. So what we're going to do in just a minute is I'm going to put a logic game scenario up on the screen. It's just going to be the scenario with the rules, so you won't see any questions just yet. And you'll want to have something to write with. And I'm going to give you about 3.5 minutes, which is kind of on the longer end of how much time you might want to take to do the setup of a logic game. And during that time, I want you to do your best to create a diagram and shorthand for the rules, and make any inferences that you can think of on your paper. And during that time, I'll hop off the camera so that you don't feel the pressure of someone watching, but I am here. I have my headphones in and I'll be monitoring the chat. And I'll also be timing you, and I'll pop back on the camera after 3.5 minutes is up. And we'll talk about a couple of different ways that someone might set up this game. So here is the game, and your time starts now. Okay, so that's 3.5 minutes. Let's talk a little bit about how someone might diagram this game. So first, when I'm approaching any logic game, whether it looks challenging or it looks easy, there are a few questions that I'm always asking myself. One of the big questions that I'm asking myself is this game asking me to put things in order? Is it asking me to put things in groups, or is it asking me to do both of those things? So I'm going to check out this game with that in mind. One of the things that I noticed from the outset is I have this sort of sequential setup where I have 3 days, 2 days, or 1 day. And that sounds a little bit like ordering to me. I also notice that I have the characteristic of things being longer or shorter. So things are going to be put in some kind of order. So let me think about whether it has a grouping aspect. The main differentiator with grouping is, are any of these things going to fall in the same category as each other, or are they all just going to be one after another? And so what I notice is we've got these 3 different service targets. What I'm wondering is it like each company gets a different service target, or could some of them have the same service target as each other? So I'm going to read the details because who knows based on how this game is set up. It says 2 service targets are set for each client, one for a website, one for voicemail. There's nothing that says that they all have to have different service targets. So that actually makes this sound like this is a game that has a little bit of an ordering element in that keeping track of who's got the longer or shorter targets. But it's also possible that some of these will be in the same group. So they'll have, be 2 of them that have a website target of 2 days. So I also have a bit of a grouping element. So I want to keep that in mind when I create my board. Another thing that I ask myself when I see the game from the outset is, does this game have subgroups that I'm going to need to account for in some way? And in this game, I do see some subgroups here. So I can imagine, like if this were a little bit of a simpler game, I can imagine a board that has 1 day, 2 days, and 3 days. And I'm just classifying I, S, and T, which of those slots do they go in? But this gets a little more complex because I have to do that for both website and voicemail. So now I'm imagining some sort of diagram in which I have to keep track of both. So I'm going to share with you 2 different boards that might work for this game. And yours may look different still. I've seen a wide range of creative and useful boards for this game. And what I want to emphasize here is that as games get more challenging, one of the things that can hold people back is if they are hung up on the thought that they have to have exactly the right board for this game. When games get more complex, when they have elements of ordering and grouping, there are often multiple ways that the game could be conceptualized. During your practice, it's really helpful to get exposed to a variety of different boards so that when you see a challenging game like this, you have a couple of different options that come to mind. But when you're actually in the moment and you're under the pressure of the timer and you need to make a decision, it's not always essential that you get the perfect board for a game. You just need to have a board that is going to work, that can function for you in that moment. And so with this particular game, I'm going to share 2 different boards, either of which could work really well to work through this game. And you may have a 3rd board sitting on your diagram that could also work equally well. So I'm going to put a line here. This is going to separate out the 2 different boards that we're going to look at. So there's one on the top and then there's one on the bottom. The one on the top kind of emphasizes the ordering aspect of this game. So this is a board for somebody who looks at this and says, all right, the way my brain thinks about this is I want to put things in order in terms of 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days. I'm going to make a row for voicemail and a row for website. And I'm going to make these spaces kind of big because I know that it's not just going to necessarily be one letter on each of these, but possibly 2 or 3, since there's nothing to say that these letters can't share a particular target. I'm going to make a little bank of the letters. So I've got I, S, and T up here. And then I'm going to jot down the rules. So over here on the side, I've gone through each of the rules nice and slowly and carefully and created some notations. So the first rule, none of the clients can have a website target that is longer than its voicemail target. So first, often when rules are phrased in this kind of negative way of this cannot happen, I need to rephrase this in my head to make it useful. So what I want to think, okay, so if this is the thing that cannot happen, then what is allowed? So if the website target can't be longer than voicemail, then the website target has to be shorter than voicemail, or don't forget this option, this is a big LSAT trap, the website target could be the same as the voicemail target. It just cannot be longer. So I've notated the first rule in terms of my rephrase of what is allowed. Then I get the voicemail target must be shorter than the other client's voicemail targets. This is phrased in a pretty clear, positive way, so I can just translate it. So I've got I and then a sub V, and then these dash lines means that it's going to come before S sub V and T sub V. And I've taken the other clients and spelled them out in terms of S and T. And then S's website target must be shorter than T's website target. And again, I here just use subscript and a line to indicate that one comes before the other. So I've got a board, I've got the rules. This is a place where a lot of people might stop and go straight into the questions. But that's not what I would do if I'm trying to get a strong score on the LSAT. Because right now I have a lot of room to make some inferences. And if I can make some inferences that are going to be true for this entire game, for every single question, before I get into the questions, then I can save myself a lot of time. So I'm going to go through my rules and think about what types of inferences I can make. And I'm going to start with ones that have specific letters in them because those are a bit easier to work with. So I know that I's voicemail target has to come before S and T. Whenever I have an ordering rule like this, I always want to think about what I call falling off the end inferences. So what this means is I think about the extremes of my diagram. If I has to have a couple of things following it, well, what would happen if I put I's voicemail target right here? Then S and T would have to come after I, but there's no room for them, so they would fall off the end of the board game. That means that I just can't go there. It's not possible to have it there because it would break the rule. So I'm going to notate that before I even start the questions by crossing off I. Typically, falling off the end inferences work in both directions. So I can't go here. That likely means something about S and T on the other side of the diagram. So over here, I know that S and T cannot go first for their voicemail target because if they did, I would fall off the end. And notice that these are specific to voicemail. The way that I'm going to track this is if I have inferences about voicemail, I'm going to put them above the top. If I have inferences about websites, I'm going to put them below the bottom. And you might find a different way that you keep track of these inferences, but it's just important that you're clear on exactly what they mean. So I'll go to my third rule about websites, and I know that S's website has to come before T's. So again, I can make some falling off the end inferences. S is not going to be able to be in third because then T would fall off the end, and T won't be able to be in first because then S would fall off the end. So I'll cross off both of those options. The first rule is a little bit more abstract, that the website has to be before the voicemail or at the same time. I'm not too sure that I can make too many inferences with that yet, so I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to just highlight one more thing that might be a little bit confusing at first. which is sometimes when my brain looks at this first space, it's like, okay, S can't go there and T can't go there, but so I must go there. That seems really logical. However, there's nothing in the setup that tells me each day has to be used. So it's possible that, I, S, and T are all going to fall across days 2 and 3, and nobody has a service target of 1 day. So it's always important with any logic game to check to see if the game dictates that every space has to be filled or not. And in this case, every space did not have to be filled. All right, so that's the top diagram. What if I wanted to think about this in a more sort of grouping-centric way? So I'm thinking about maybe I have a category for voicemail. And I'm going to move this down a little bit. Oops, sorry, I'm just running out of room at the bottom of the screen there. Give me 1 second. Minimize this now. Okay, so what I want to do is have one of these columns labeled with a V for voicemail, and then the other column is going to be labeled with a W for website. And I need to track the number of days for each company. So I'm going to put I, S, and T. And then what's going to go in these spaces is actually the number of days. So I'm going to be keeping track of that. So I start by just kind of thinking about this first rule. W has to have fewer days than V, or it needs to be the same. One thing that I can do is write this sort of between the columns, try to make that relationship clear. So if I'm using numbers, that means that V is going to be greater than or equal to W. So I'm going to use my old friend, the alligator symbol, and I'll add the equal to sign to show that that number for V is going to be larger. I know that all these numbers are going to be 1, 2, or 3, so I'll put that over here as my bank. Let's see if we can narrow it down a little bit. So I know that I's voicemail has to be shorter than S's voicemail or T's voicemail. So I'll go over to the voicemail column and think about what that means in terms of extremes, the same way I did at the top diagram. So the top diagram, I've made some falling off the end inferences. If I's voicemail has to be shorter, then it can't be the longest possible one. It can't be 3 days. So I'm going to put the option of 1 or 2. That also means that S and T can't have a voicemail target of 1, because then they'd be the shortest and it wouldn't be possible for I to be shorter. So they're going to be 2 or 3. Then I'll take a look at the third rule. S's website target is shorter than T's website target. So similar type of thinking here. If T needs to have a longer website target, then it's going to have to be 2 or 3. It won't be able to be 1. And S won't be able to be 3, so it's going to have to be 1 or 2. The last open spot I have is down here for I's website. Let's see if I can make any inferences. I know that its voicemail has to be greater than or equal to its website, and its voicemail is going to be 1 or 2. So that means that its website can't be any higher than 1 or 2. All right, so these are 2 different ways of thinking about this game. And again, there may be some others out there that you thought of. I am going to pause for a question. So I'd love to hear in the chat window, which of these diagrams works better for your brain? Does the top diagram work better? Does the bottom diagram work better? Or do you have something different that you came up with on your paper that works better for your brain? Take a moment to tell me in the chat. And also, this is a great time to let me know if anything was unclear, if you'd like additional explanation. Cool. It's neat to see that just even in the chat window, some people are saying the top one, some people are saying the bottom one. Personally, the top one works better for my brain, but everybody's brain is different, and I've seen a lot of students who come up with the bottom one more instinctively and work better through the questions using the bottom one. So again, this is why exposure to a variety of ways of setting up a game can be really useful, so you can get comfortable with the tools that make the most sense for you. All right, I'm going to clear off a little bit of this, and then we're going to start getting into some questions. Before we do our timed question sets, we're just going to start with a single sort of warm-up question. So let me just delete a few of these notes and go ahead and get yourself ready for the first question. You might want to mark A through E on your paper. Typically when we're working on a logic games question, we're trying to average about a minute. So some questions may end up taking us a bit longer than a minute, and that's okay. Some questions may end up being a bit shorter than a minute, and for most people taking the test, there might be a question or two that we end up having to skip for time purposes, and that's totally okay too. So for this first question, I'm going to give you about a minute and a half. I'll hop off the camera, and then when the minute and a half is up, I'll put up a poll to see what answers you came up with. Okay, that's about a minute and a half. I'm going to put up a poll. Just go ahead and mark the answer that you would select if you had to right now, even if that's a guess. And again, even if you're not finished, it's great to get in the habit of knowing when to move on from a question. So I encourage you to go ahead and just take a guess. All right, thanks everybody. So I'm going to walk through this question with you using both diagrams. We'll just go one at a time. So we're going to start with how we might set this question up using the top diagram. So this question is what we call a conditional question. And what makes it conditional is this word if right at the beginning of the question. So a conditional question is one that provides me with a little bit of new information, sort of a new rule almost, that is true for this question, but this question only. When I have a conditional question, the strategy that I typically go to is to do a quick sketch of a new diagram in which I make all of the inferences that would be true for this particular conditional. So I'll show you what this would look like on my paper. If I'm remaking the top diagram, I'm going to quickly draw 3 lines. It's not going to be perfect, so you'll see that it comes out, a little bit messy. I'm in a hurry here. And I'm going to label V and W. I might not take the time to label 1, 2, and 3 because I know what those are, kind of intuitively just by glancing at this. And so I'm going to save time where I can. But I'll put my V and W right here. I also typically do carry over the inferences that I've already made. So I've already figured out S and T can't go here, that I cannot be in third, and then the inferences about S and T on the bottom. And, it takes a minute to jot those down, but I typically find it's worthwhile to have that information right in front of me as I'm working through a question, rather than having to constantly look back and forth to my original diagram. Once I've done that, then I'm going to put down the new piece of information. So no one has a voicemail target of 3 days. I'm going to cross off the third space altogether. And then I'm going to start making inferences based on this new diagram. So I'm going to go again to kind of my more specific restrictive rules and see what I can do with those. So rule number 2 tells me that I has to have a voicemail target that's shorter than S and T. So there's really only one way that this can work out. I can't go into because then it wouldn't be possible for it to be shorter. So it's going to have to go here in 1. And that means that both S and T are going to go in space 2. Now, one thing that I can do on the LSAT to kind of maximize my efficiency is after I've made sort of a substantial inference, I can pause to see if I can narrow down the answers, or if I've even maybe solved the question already to avoid doing more work than I have to. So let's check this out. I now have made an inference about I, S, and T in terms of their voicemail. So I'm just going to scan for any voicemail related ones. And I'm looking for something must be true except. So I'm looking for something that does not have to be true. And I'm going to cross off anything that does have to be true. So I know S's voicemail target does have to be 2 days. T's voicemail target does have to be 2 days. Cool. So I've already narrowed it down to a 1 in 3 chance just based off this first inference. And if I happen to be running low on time, that'll help me have a higher chance of getting this question right. All right, so now I need to do some work with the website. So S has to come before T. So that makes it pretty clear that I'm going to need to have S in space 1 and T in space 2. That's the only way for S to come before T. That's a significant inference, so I'll check to see if I can rule anything off yet. So T's website target is 2 days, does have to be true. Ooh, S's website target is 2 days is something that is clearly false based on this diagram. So since S's website target doesn't have to be 2 days, and I know that it's clearly false, I might choose in this moment to just go ahead and select B and move on for the sake of time. I also might say, okay, I see another option there. I's target is 1 day. Maybe I messed something up. Maybe I need to check on that. And so I could go back and investigate what's up with I's website target. I don't have any rules about I's website target. So the last rule that I have is that the website has to be before the voicemail or at the same time. And I's voicemail is at 1. So I's website is also going to have to be at 1. So that does have to be true. And my initial instinct that B was my correct answer turns out to be right. B is the correct answer. Let me know if you have any questions about that. And while you do, let's take a look at what this would look like on the bottom diagram. So best practice is to always sketch out a new diagram for each conditional question because your original diagram is precious. You're going to need to refer to it for a whole bunch of questions. So you don't want to write on it and then forget which rules are set in stone for the whole game and which ones were just true for this particular question. That said, just for the sake of time, I'm going to modify the original diagram right here for the bottom one, but I want you to know that if this were the actual test, I would definitely resketch this out so that I can work on it. All right, so here I'm told none of the clients has a voicemail target of 3 days. So I'm going to cross off any of the 3s for voicemail. And then I can check to see if that helps me eliminate any answers. So I have 2 voicemail targets set in stone. S and T are both 2. So just like with the top diagram, I'd be able to cross off C and E because those do have to be true. I know the voicemail target has to be greater than or equal to the website target, so that helps me a little bit. Like T's website target is not going to be 3, it's going to have to be 2. Going back to my answers, I can then cross off D. And then I'm going to think about what else do I know about website targets. I know that S's has to be shorter than T's, so that means that S's is going to have to be 1. That puts me back in that same place where I'm thinking that B is probably right. Then I go back to that first rule, the website needs to be shorter than the voicemail. I don't have anything with that quite yet. I'll go back to the second rule. Oh, I's voicemail has to be shorter than S and T's voicemail. So there's our 2, I's needs to be 1, which means its website needs to be 1. Now I can cross off A. So as you can see, both diagrams are really kind of equally effective in arriving at the solution and in a very similar manner. For both of them, I need to lean on the rules to help me generate inferences in a methodical way to quickly arrive at the correct answer. All right, take a moment to let me know if you have any questions in the chat window. Also, would love to hear if there's anything from this that you want to remember, a takeaway that you'd like to do in your own practice. Okay, not seeing any questions right now, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next order of business, which is going to be our first timed set. So when we do a timed set, we typically want to give ourselves maybe a minute to a minute and a half per question. So this timed set is going to be 3 questions. I'm going to be gentle on you and give you an average of a minute and a half for these 3 questions. So I'll give you 4.5 minutes. I want you to focus on implementing strong conditional strategies. So you'll notice that each of these starts with an if, like our last question did. I also want you to focus on time management. If you've got 3 questions here, sometimes it's not always going to be realistic to have a strong shot of getting all 3 right. So I want you to think about what you can do in terms of your time management to get the highest possible number of questions right. And how can you avoid getting sucked into the trap of spending too long on, say, the first question and not getting to the remaining 2 questions. All right, so 4.5 minutes. I'm gonna hop off camera. I'll be back in 4.5 minutes. Ready, go. All right, that's 4.5 minutes. One thing that's really important to do in your practice when you're doing mini timed sets like this is after you've completed them, it can be really tempting to just dive into review, see which ones you got right, see which ones you got wrong, and go over the process. And that, of course, is really important. But you also want to take some time to just reflect on how your time management went before you even get into what was right and wrong. So while this is still fresh, take a moment to tell me in the chat window, how was your time management here? Did you have any places where you felt like you got a little stuck or stayed too long? Did you have any successes, places where you were really efficient or you moved on from a question that you were feeling stuck on? Tell me in the chat, how did it go? Okay, cool. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. It's not uncommon to have that experience of only finishing 1 out of the 3. That's sort of the time suck experience. Yeah, yeah. Sounds like you're not alone. Okay. Good to know, Kimberly. So sometimes one of the questions is going to be a bit easier. It's always helpful to keep in mind when you're stuck on a question that the next one might be easier and that the time you've spent on this one may not be worth it in terms of continuing to work on that question. So let's work through these questions and think about how we can solve them in an efficient manner. So let's start with the first one. And again, we'll try to use both diagrams for each of these 3 questions so that you can see it solved the way that you would work on it. For the sake of time, I'm not going to sketch out new diagrams here, but that is something that I would encourage you to do in your personal practice. So for number 12, we've got T's website target is shorter than its voicemail target. So the first thing I'm going to do is jot down this rule on my diagram, which I would have sketched again. T's website is going to be shorter than T's voicemail. And a lot of times on these inference questions, another great early step is to go through the same process that I went through in my original rules with my original diagram. So originally when I had these ordering rules, I made some falling off the end inferences. Might be good for me to do that here. So if T's website has to be shorter than its voicemail, then T's website can't be third because then the voicemail would fall off the end. So I'm going to cross off T here. And I already know that T's voicemail can't be first because then based on another rule, something would fall off the end. What I notice here is that I have a cross off for 1 and a cross off for 3 for T. This is why those cross offs are important because sometimes they end up adding up to tell me something. If T can't go in 1 or 3, then T's website is going to have to go in 2. And that means that T's voicemail is going to have to go in 3. Now that I've made that inference, I just want to start connecting it to other rules. So let's see if anything that I put on the board connects to another rule. So I have a T voicemail and a T website pinned down. I know that I's voicemail has to be shorter than T's voicemail. So that doesn't tell me too much because I could go in 1 or 2, but I'm going to put a cloud and put it over here. I also know that S's website has to be shorter than T's website. So I'm going to put an S over here. And then I'm going to stop. I've made as many inferences as I can right now. So I'm going to come back up to my diagram and see what I can figure out. I's voicemail has to be, well, we don't know much about I, so I'm going to skip past A through C and focus on what I do know, which is that S has a website target of 1 day based on my diagram, and I'm going to choose E. All right. So for those of you who used this top diagram, I'd love to hear what moves you saw there that you want to remember to replicate next time. So the basic moves were write out the new rule, add any inferences based on the new rule, use your cross-offs on the bottom to make deductions about where things might have to go, and then connect anything that you've put on the board to your already existing rules. There also was a last touch in terms of speed at the end there of knowing what you're sure about on your diagram versus what you're unsure about. If it's a must-be question, then you want to focus on what you're sure about. I'm sure about S and T, so I'm not even really going to look at these first 3 answer choices. I'm going to focus on that last one. While you're telling me what you want to remember from that question, let's see how we would do it with the bottom diagram. So if T's website target is shorter than its voicemail target. So my options were 2 or 3 for each. Website has to be shorter. So that means that the website's going to be 2 and the voicemail is going to be 3. And then I'll start thinking about other rules. So I know that I's voicemail has to be shorter than T's voicemail. That doesn't give me a lot because T's is 3, I can be 1 or 2. I know that S's website has to be shorter than T's website. So T's website is 2. That gives me that S's website has to be 1. And once again, that would get me to my correct answer. So a lot of times we're going through sort of a chain of inferences here where things build upon each other. That can feel kind of like mysterious at times, but it really just follows a logical sequence of thinking about, I have this new piece of information, how does it connect back to my existing rules? All right, I'm going to clear off the board from this question, so we have some room to work on the next one. Let me know if you had any questions about number 12 there. So let's take a look at number 13. We're going to follow a similar process. So if I's website target is 2 days, which must also be 2 days. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put my new info on my board. Again, I would sketch a new little board and put it on there. And then I'm going to immediately start thinking, where does this connect to any other rules? So this is about I's website, and I's website doesn't directly play into rule 2 or 3. I do know from rule 1 that websites have a connection to voicemail. So website has to be shorter than voicemail or the same, which means that I's voicemail is going to have to be in space 2 or 3. But I've already figured out that I cannot go in 3. So I'm going to put I in 2 and check to see if that gets me anything. And hey, that's it. That's the answer. This is a great example of where not going too far down the inference chain before you check your answers can really save you a ton of time. In this one, the first inference that I'm able to make based off of this website voicemail connection ends up being the correct answer. Let's see what that would look like down at the bottom. So I's website target is 2 days. So I'm going to cross off the 1. I see immediately it has to be less than or equal to its voicemail target. So I'm going to cross off the 1 here and bam, I'm back to answer choice A again. All right, let me know if you have any questions about that one. And let's take a look at number 14. So S's voicemail target is shorter than T's website target. So once again, this is kind of like number 12 in that I have a new sort of rule. So I'm going to jot it down. S's voicemail is shorter than T's website target. And then just like in number 12, I'm going to think about any inferences I can make in terms of falling off the end. So if S's voicemail has to be shorter, then it can't be in space 3. And if T's website has to be longer, then it can't be in space 1. I also noticed that S's voicemail can't be in space 1. So now, similar to question 1, where we had sort of the 2 cross-offs, I'm noticing that S is going to have to go in space 2. That's the only space left for it. So watching out for those cross-offs is super important. And if S is in space 2, then that means that T is going to be in space 3. Let me recheck the question and see if I can eliminate anything yet. So what could be 2 days? I've placed S's voicemail And T's website, I know T's website is not going to be 2 days, so I'm going to cross that off. But I'm not quite there yet, so let me see what else I can do. So I'm looking for direct connections. So I've placed S voicemail and T website. Notice those both play into existing rules. So I know that I's voicemail has to be shorter than S's voicemail, so that's going to go here. And S's website has to be shorter than T's website. So S could really go in 1 or 2 as far as I know. Okay, so I is going to be in 1 for voicemail, so that gives me another cross off. That's not going to be 2. Now let me go back to this first rule. So website has to be shorter than voicemail or the same. So if S's website could be 1 or 2, and it would still be shorter or the same as its voicemail, but I's voicemail is in space 1. So that means that I's website can't really be shorter, but it can be the same. So I'm going to put it here in space 1. So that means that I's website target 1 day. So I'm slowly narrowing this down. What about T? So I've got website before voicemail or the same. T's website is in space 3. So its voicemail is going to have to be in space 3 as well. So that means this voicemail is not 2 days, which is by cross elimination going to show me the only option here is C. Let's see how that would look at the bottom. So S's voicemail is shorter than T's website. So for S's voicemail, we have option 2 or 3. T's website, we have 2 or 3. So the voicemail's shorter, so I'm going to make that one 2, and this one 3. And then I'm going to start going through my rules again. So I's voicemail is shorter than S's voicemail, so I is going to be 1. S's website is shorter than T's website. Both of these options, 1 and 2, are okay. This needs to be greater than or equal to, so this is going to be 1. This is okay as it is, but this is going to be 3. So now I'm being asked what could be 2 days. Options remaining are just this and this, only things to do with S. So I would go ahead and choose C. All right, let me know if you have any questions. If not, this is where we're gonna wrap up. So I encourage you all to think about what you want to implement from the session that we saw tonight. It's not possible to be too specific. So perhaps you saw a certain type of inference move that you'd like to replicate. Pretty much all of what we did is very commonly used on a variety of logic games. Perhaps you're thinking about implementing some timed mini practice sets like this in your everyday practice so that you can get used to managing time across a series of problems. Perhaps there's something that you learned about diagramming that you would like to practice. If this was helpful to you and you would like to experience some more Manhattan Prep teaching, we do have all of our course schedules published on our website. And remember that you can come try the first session of any of our courses for free.